The story of how I ended up waging a full-scale war against a suburban HOA begins with something as simple as trees. Trees I had planted, cared for, and protected. Trees that stood on my land on my side of the fence. Trees that should have been no one's concern but mine. But when you're dealing with a homeowners association run by power-hungry busybodies who mistake authority for entitlement, nothing, not even nature, is truly safe. Let me back up. My name's Matt Reynolds. I'm 53, retired from a long, exhausting career in electrical engineering. I worked hard, saved harder, and finally bought myself the dream I've been building toward for decades. A quiet, 10-acre ranch property just outside the suffocating grasp of suburbia. Not a sprawling cattle operation or farm, just land, open space, room to breathe, to stretch, to plant, and to live the kind of peaceful, self-sufficient life I'd always wanted. The ranch had been overgrown when I bought it. The previous owners had let it go wild for years. So I spent months reclaiming it, cutting back scrub, clearing debris, planting rows of trees, maples mostly, because there's nothing more satisfying than watching something grow because of your effort. I marked my boundaries clearly, fenced what needed fencing, filed all the proper paperwork with the county. Legally, everything was airtight. No HOA jurisdiction, no suburban committees. No one to tell me what to do with my land. Or so I thought. The HOA in question wasn't even my HOA. It belonged to the newly built subdivision a half-mile down the road. Picture-perfect homes lined up like plastic toys, identical fences, identical flower beds, identical mailboxes. The kind of place where the grass is surgically trimmed and the neighbors snitch on each other for leaving trash cans out too long. That HOA had a reputation. Petty, overreaching, aggressive about enforcing standards even beyond their own boundaries. At first, I figured they'd leave me alone. I wasn't part of their world. But Karen, yes, her actual name was Karen, had other ideas. Karen was the HOA president, and Karen had decided that my property, though outside their jurisdiction, was impacting the aesthetic value of the greater community. Specifically, she didn't like my trees. It started with letters. Polite at first, then increasingly condescending. Requests that I consider how the visibility of my land from neighboring properties affects community morale. Warnings that unkempt growth may invite rodents or diminish neighborhood property values. Suggestions that I align my landscaping with neighborhood expectations. I ignored them. I didn't live in their neighborhood. I wasn't subject to their rules. Legally, I owed them nothing. But Karen didn't like being ignored. One morning, I woke up to find my trees gone. Not all of them. Just the row nearest the boundary, the ones visible from the main road. Neatly cut, stacked like firewood, fresh sawdust on the ground. No note, no apology, no explanation. Just gone. I called the county. No permits filed. I checked my cameras. Footage showed a landscaping crew wearing HOA badges, marching right onto my property and cutting down my trees as if they had every right. Karen herself was on video, pointing, directing, clipboard in hand. I was furious. I confronted her, of course, drove straight to their little HOA office and demanded an explanation. Karen met me with that tight, fake smile people reserve for the truly self-righteous. They were encroaching on our sight lines, she said, as if that excused trespass and vandalism. You really ought to thank us. It looks so much cleaner now. I reminded her, calmly at first, that my property was not part of her HOA, that she had no legal authority, that what she'd done was, in fact, illegal. Her smile didn't budge. We're simply maintaining standards for the good of the broader community. I doubt the county will see this as more than a misunderstanding. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just entitled. She was arrogant enough to believe she could get away with anything, that no one would challenge her, that I would roll over, replant, and move on. What she didn't know was who she'd picked a fight with. See, I spent 30 years building infrastructure, power grids, networks, systems designed to outlast storms and sabotage. I knew how to plan, how to retaliate, how to engineer outcomes. Karen thought she was playing suburban chess. I was preparing for war. First, I documented everything. Photos, footage, statements. Filed police reports, insurance claims, and legal complaints. I knew the wheels of justice turned slow, but I wanted a paper trail 10 miles long. Not just for me, for what was coming. Then, I started laying groundwork. Karen's HOA office wasn't just a room in someone's house. It was a standalone structure at the edge of their development, technically owned by the HOA, but sitting on a strange sliver of land leased from the county decades ago. Land the county, it turns out, was looking to offload. Budget cuts, restructuring. The usual bureaucratic dance. A quiet deal. Public record, if you knew where to look. So I bought it. The land, not the office. The building was theirs. But the land? That became mine. And with it, the right to dictate utilities, access, and easements. Karen didn't notice at first. Why would she? People like her don't read property transfers until it affects them directly. They assumed their lease was secure. They didn't check the expiration dates. They didn't realize that the county, in a moment of bureaucratic laziness, had signed it over without notifying them. I waited. Patience is key in these things. Let them get comfortable. Let them ignore the quiet signs of change. The updated zoning notices. The small construction markers. The utility work orders filed under my name. And then, one bright Monday morning, I delivered the first blow. I informed the HOA, in writing, that their office now sat on private property and that I intended to repurpose the land. They had 30 days to vacate. Naturally, they protested, claimed rights, threatened legal action, called the county, only to be told the transfer was valid, the paperwork solid, the sale final. Karen showed up at my gate, red-faced and fuming. "You can't do this. We have rights." I smiled, the same smile she'd given me when my trees vanished. Funny, that's what I said. 30 days passed. They didn't move. So I did what any good engineer would do. I disconnected their utilities. Electricity? Cut. Water? Shut off. Internet? Gone. All within my rights as the property owner. I even installed a lovely new fence with lock gates and clear signage. Private property. No trespassing. Still, they persisted. Karen posted outrage notices. Threatened more lawsuits. Claimed harassment. That's when I unveiled Phase 2. A temporary, portable office structure appeared on the lot. Bright, obnoxious, impossible to miss. Solar-powered, time generators. Motion sensor lights rigged to flash flood the area every night from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. A schedule designed to maximize irritation. And a sign, future site of Reynolds Electrical Consulting. Not a lie. I did technically file for the LLC. Neighbors complained. HOA members grumbled. Karen fumed. But there was nothing they could do. I owned the land. I controlled the power. I set the hours. I enforced the rules. And I wasn't done yet, because Karen thought this was about trees. She hadn't even begun to understand what she'd started. Karen thought she could hold out. That much was clear. Despite the mounting pressure, despite the utilities cutoff, despite the embarrassment of having their official HOA office effectively squatting on land they no longer owned, she clung to her belief that her suburban bureaucracy would save her, that some county official would swoop in and undo what had been done, declare my purchase void, restore her authority with the stroke of a pen. She underestimated just how careful I had been. I wasn't new to this game. I'd built infrastructure projects through more red tape than Karen had HOA meetings under her belt. The land was mine, fair and legal. There were no loopholes left for her to crawl through. Still, she fought. She rallied her HOA board, tried to spin a narrative that I was harassing them, abusing some imaginary loophole to punish them for innocent mistakes. She filed complaints with the county, all rejected. She even tried to call the police, claiming I'd stolen their property. The officer who responded had already seen my paperwork. He politely explained to Karen that no crime had been committed. The building was theirs, but the ground beneath it, mine. If I wanted to turn off the lights, I could. If I wanted to fence it off, I could. If I wanted to park a semi-truck in front of it every day, I could. Private property laws are funny like that. Still, Karen pressed on. That's the thing about HOA types. They don't know how to back down. To them, admitting defeat is worse than losing outright. So she doubled down. She started parking cars around the perimeter, trying to block access to my land. Claimed they were temporary visitors, entitled to public road access. I had them towed. She called in contractors to run portable generators to keep her precious office powered. I filed noise complaints, legitimate ones. After all, they'd set up without permits, without my permission, on land they didn't own. The county shut them down faster than you can say zoning violation. But Karen wasn't just stubborn. She was vindictive. That's when the petty harassment began. Anonymous reports filed against my property. Claims of improper waste disposal, unsafe structures, noise disturbances. Every time an inspector came out, they left shaking their heads. My permits were immaculate. My structures were sound. My land, my rules, perfectly by the book. I made sure of it. Behind the scenes, I was working angles Karen didn't even realize existed. I wasn't just leaning on my legal rights. I was making friends. Quietly, steadily, I was becoming the county's favorite new landowner. I attended council meetings, donated to local initiatives, supported the fire department's fundraiser. Not for politics, not for appearances, for leverage, because small towns remember who helps them, and they return favors in ways paperwork never can. So when Karen tried to escalate her campaign, when she pushed for new zoning restrictions, for emergency ordinances to protect community assets, she found herself politely but firmly stonewalled. Her reputation was crumbling. Her board was fracturing. Some of them started whispering about stepping down, about letting this whole mess blow over, about whether Karen's vendetta was worth the HOA's future. And through it all, I kept turning the screws. I installed motion-activated sprinklers, not to water anything, to blast any cars or people lingering too long near my fence. Legal? Absolutely. Effective? More than I could have dreamed. I adjusted my floodlights to flicker unpredictably through the night, casting long, unsettling shadows over their little prefab office. At first, they complained about harassment, but after I pointed out that rural properties often use such measures to deter trespassers and showed the police the uptick in suspicious activity, reports I conveniently filed, well, who could argue? Karen grew desperate. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She authorized a crew unlicensed, uninsured, likely under the table, to try and move the HOA office structure off my land without permits, without notice. Middle of the night, flatbed truck rumbling up with workers ready to haul it off like some oversized shed. I was waiting, cameras rolling, sheriff on speed dial. They didn't get far. The deputy who showed up was already familiar with the saga. He wasn't in a forgiving mood. Karen wasn't there in person, of course. Too cowardly for that. But her name was all over the authorization paperwork the crew sheepishly handed over. Trespassing, vandalism, attempted theft. Suddenly, Karen's HOA wasn't just annoying. It was facing criminal charges. Her board panicked. Emergency meetings were called. Members resigned. Dues dried up as residents refused to pay into what they now saw as Karen's personal vendetta fund. And me? I kept smiling, kept working, kept expanding. Because while Karen was busy fighting to cling to her crumbling kingdom, I was building something better. The lot where their office sat, it wasn't going to waste. I'd filed plans for a new facility, a legitimate one this time. A satellite office for a consulting business I was setting up, specializing in smart grid systems for rural properties. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's HOA, which once dictated power usage to every house in its reach, would soon be sharing space with a company controlling its utilities, at least symbolically. But I wasn't rushing. No, I wanted Karen to sweat. To watch, helpless, as I transformed her battlefield into my playground. The power cuts weren't random anymore. They were scheduled, precise, on timers synced to her most important meetings, her conference calls, her events. The HOA office would hum back to life, only to blink into darkness at the most inconvenient moments. Legally, nothing they could do. My land, my power grid, my discretion. Word spread. Residents laughed behind closed doors. Have you heard? Karen's office loses power every Tuesday at 3. Must be some kind of coincidence. Maybe she should have left the trees alone. Karen stopped showing her face so often after that, retreated behind email blasts and half-hearted directives. The HOA limped on, but its heart was gone. Its members wanted peace, normalcy, not war with a neighbor who'd outplayed them at every turn. And as for me, I wasn't done. Not yet, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about principle, about reminding people like Karen that power, real power, doesn't come from rules written in suburbia's fine print. It comes from knowing where to draw the line and making sure no one crosses it again. The next phase was coming, and Karen wouldn't see it until it was far, far too late. By the time summer rolled in, the HOA's so-called headquarters on my land had become something of a local punchline. I'd done nothing illegal. I'd broken no codes. Every petty little revenge I delivered, the lights, the sprinklers, the carefully timed power outages, was within my rights as a legal landowner. Yet somehow, to the outside world, it looked like I'd flipped the script so thoroughly that even the HOA enforcers themselves were prisoners of my pettiness. And honestly, I wasn't done rubbing salt in the wound. Karen, despite her bravado, had finally begun to crack. I heard whispers through the grapevine. HOA members tired of paying dues for lawsuits, for generators, for legal consultations. Members angry that their HOA dues weren't going toward maintaining their pristine lawns or repainting fences, but were instead financing Karen's endless war against a man who didn't even live in their neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I had no doubt Karen had considered walking away more than once. But walking away would mean admitting she lost. That's not how people like Karen operate. They dig in. They get mean. They lash out. Even as her board shrank, her influence withered, and her neighbors grew more and more embarrassed to be associated with her. She pushed forward with lawsuits, cease and desist letters, more harassment. But the thing about going to war with an engineer is we plan further ahead than you can imagine. You see, while Karen was busy reacting, I'd been preparing. I had big plans for my land, plans that stretched far beyond simply humiliating her. The office space she refused to vacate, it was scheduled for demolition. Not suddenly, not cruelly, officially, publicly, with proper permits. A new structure was coming, one that would serve my community, not hers. I wanted to make sure she knew. I sent the notice through certified mail, just to watch her squirm. Her response was predictable. More threats, more desperate legal filings, more chest-thumping about property rights that no longer existed for her. Meanwhile, I made my next move, not against Karen, against her HOA itself. See, buried in the fine print of their covenants, restrictions, and bylaws was a little-known clause about emergency relocation of HOA operations in the event of a catastrophic failure of their facilities. It hadn't been invoked in decades because, well, no one had imagined the HOA office would suddenly lose its land and power. But there it was, plain as day. If the primary office was compromised, HOA business would be transferred to the nearest suitable facility within a 5-mile radius. I had recently purchased a small, vacant building just within that radius. A dusty old warehouse, barely used, rezoned for commercial operations. And wouldn't you know it, I offered it up, publicly, formally, as a suitable new location for their operations. A good faith gesture, on paper. Completely legal. They couldn't refuse without breaching their own bylaws. The catch? That building sat squarely within my newly formed business campus. And unlike my ranch land, this one wasn't rural. It was in the heart of a heavily regulated commercial zone. My zone, my power grid, my security, my rules. They accepted, of course. They had no choice. Karen probably thought she'd won a small victory. A new office space, at least, even if she hated admitting it came from me. I had the building ready for them, freshly painted, wired, functional. But I also had it rigged. Timed power outages, intermittent internet service, security doors on smart locks, scheduled to randomly deny access without notice, thermostats programmed to fluctuate between frigid and sweltering depending on the day, all perfectly legal. all perfectly explainable as technical issues with a new facility. After all, it was just a coincidence that their scheduled meetings happened during the worst outages, or that their annual General Assembly ended in darkness as the locks refused to release the doors. Karen complained, of course, but now her HOA board had had enough. They started questioning her leadership, started blaming her for dragging them into this mess. Some of them openly admitted they never wanted to move their office to my property in the first place. They just wanted peace. They want to get back to enforcing fence heights and mailbox colors, not fighting an invisible, infuriating enemy who always seemed 2 steps ahead. Resignations rolled in. Dues dropped off. Members pulled out. The HOA crumbled under the weight of its own pettiness. And Karen? Well, Karen couldn't hold power in a kingdom no one wanted to be part of. But even with her world collapsing, she wasn't smart enough to quit. She filed yet another lawsuit, claimed harassment, emotional distress, interference with business operations. This time, I didn't even flinch. I handed it straight to my attorney, the same attorney who'd been quietly documenting every incident, every letter, every baseless accusation since the beginning. We countersued. Trespass, vandalism, unauthorized removal of property, harassment, defamation, loss of business opportunities, financial damages, pain and suffering. I laid it all out, backed by evidence so airtight it might as well have been sealed in concrete. Video footage, emails, police reports, witness statements. I had everything. The court date arrived. Karen looked different, not the smug, self-assured HOA president anymore. Tired, bitter, smaller, somehow. Her lawyer looked even worse, like he knew they walked into a buzzsaw and there was no walking back out. It wasn't a long trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge barely concealed his disdain for the entire circus. In the end, the verdict was clear. Karen lost. The HOA lost. Damages awarded in my favor. Karen held personally liable for unauthorized actions she took as president. Fines, fees, court costs, enough to bankrupt her personally and fracture what little remained of her reputation. Her house went up for sale within the month. Quietly, cheaply. No one wanted it. The HOA dissolved soon after. Without leadership, without funds, without a headquarters, there was nothing left to enforce. The neighborhood reverted to county governance. Residents celebrated. No more rules about flagpoles or flower colors. No more Karen. And me? I broke ground on my new building. A proper office this time. Solar-powered, energy-efficient, state-of-the-art systems. The kind of place designed to stand for decades. A sign went up out front. Reynolds Energy Solutions. Below it, in smaller print, a little nod to my past. Former home of the suburban HOA headquarters. Rest in peace. Neighbors laughed. Contractors laughed. Even the county clerk laughed when she signed off on the permits. Karen didn't laugh. But she wasn't around to see it anymore. I wasn't done. Not quite. One last gesture remained. A small one. Petty maybe, but satisfying. I sent her a final certified letter. No threats. No demands. Just a photograph of her old office. Demolished. Flattened. Gone. Captioned. Should have left the trees alone. If there's one thing HOA Karens never expect, it's losing. They're so used to getting their way with threats, fines, and passive-aggressive newsletters that when someone beats them at their own game, they simply don't know how to process it. That's exactly where Karen found herself. For the first time in her long, petty reign, she wasn't in control anymore. I was. The day they tore down her precious HOA office was the day the neighborhood finally exhaled. It wasn't just about the building, it was about the symbol. That office had represented years of overreach, of ridiculous enforcement, of a woman who thought her clipboard gave her more power than common sense or decency. Watching it reduce to rubble was like watching the HOA's grip crumble in real time. I stood at the edge of the demolition site, coffee in hand, chatting with the foreman as the backhoe crunched through drywall and outdated office furniture. The crew worked fast. I'd paid them well, and they'd been more than happy to handle a job with as much local notoriety. A few even snapped photos for their personal collections. The great HOA takedown, one of them joked. Across the road, I noticed a few familiar faces peeking through blinds, watching in silent satisfaction. These were the homeowners Karen had bullied for years over minor infractions. Garden gnomes placed too close to sidewalks. Patriotic flags hung without permission. Children's toys left out of sight for more than 30 minutes. They didn't cheer out loud. They didn't have to. Their smiles said it all. But this wasn't just revenge for them. This was for me, for my trees, for the blatant trespass, for the arrogance of thinking she could bulldoze her way through someone else's life without consequence. Once the lot was cleared, my new building went up fast. The contrast was almost comical. Where there had once been a drab, aging office hunched like a tumor on my land, now there stood a sleek, modern facility. Solar panels gleamed on the roof. Smart glass windows adjusted to the light. It was everything the HOA office had never been: useful, efficient, future-proof. And it wasn't just there for show. I made sure word got around. Reynolds Energy Solutions was offering discounts on energy audits and upgrades to every former member of the now-defunct HOA. Solar installations, battery backups, smart home consultations, all at rates the HOA would have forbidden or complicated with their endless rules and red tape. It was my way of turning the knife with a smile. The people Karen had once controlled were now coming to me voluntarily, paying me for services she would have blocked just to maintain appearances. The irony was delicious. But Karen wasn't around to see most of it. After the court ruling, after the fines and fees and public humiliation, she'd disappeared. Word had it she sold her house at a loss and moved to a smaller town upstate, one without an HOA. Ironic, isn't it? After all those years enforcing rules, she'd ended up somewhere she couldn't even pay to have them. Her house sat empty for months. Overgrown lawn, faded shutters, a silent testament to how quickly the mighty fall when they picked the wrong battle. Eventually, a young family bought it. First-time homeowners thrilled to find something affordable, not the least bit concerned about maintaining some arbitrary neighborhood standard. They installed a swing, set Karen would have written 10 letters about. I sent them a welcome basket. As for the neighborhood, it transformed almost overnight. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, people relaxed. Fences went up, porches got painted bright colors, gardens grew wild and free. What had once been a place of whispered complaints and paranoid conformity became, finally, a place where people seemed happy to live. And my ranch? It thrived. The trees they cut down? Replanted. Stronger than before. Nature doesn't hold grudges, but I'll admit, I planted those saplings with a little extra satisfaction. I expanded the trails, added a pond, hosted community barbecues where the old HOA office had once stood. People brought their kids, their dogs, their lawn chairs. No rules, no regulations, just neighbors enjoying the space together. Some of them would ask, half joking, if I planned to run for some kind of local office now that I'd defeated the HOA. I always laughed and told them no thanks. I'd had my fill of bureaucracy for one lifetime. My revenge wasn't about titles or positions of power. It was about freedom, about proving that you don't have to put up with overreach if you're willing to fight back smart, slow, and steady. There was a final irony to it all, though. One afternoon, as I was closing up the new office, I noticed an envelope tucked under the door. No return address. Just my name, written in tight, familiar handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. A copy of the original HOA letter Karen had sent me, the one demanding I consider how my landscaping choices affected the greater community. At the bottom, in a different pen, someone had scribbled 2 words. You win. No signature, but it didn't need one. I didn't tell anyone about that letter. Didn't frame it or keep it as a trophy. I threw it in the trash with the rest of the HOA's paperwork, where it belonged. But I'll admit it felt good. Not because I needed Karen's acknowledgement, but because, in the end, she understood. She finally knew she'd picked the wrong man to mess with. The revenge wasn't in bankrupting her. It wasn't in tearing down her office or turning her kingdom into a cautionary tale. It was in the simple, undeniable fact that I'd outlasted her, outsmarted her, that while she was running away from her failures, I was thriving in the freedom I'd fought for, and as I locked the door behind me that night, watching the sun set over my restored trees and peaceful land, I realized something important. The best revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's not about shouting, "I told you so," from the rooftops. The best revenge is peace. It's success. It's building something that lasts longer than anyone's petty rules ever could. And in the end, it's knowing that people like Karen have to live with the knowledge that they lost. Not just the battle, not just the war, but everything. Life is a funny way of coming full circle, especially when people like Karen think they've written the ending for you. But what Karen never understood, and what the HOA never grasped, was that stories like mine don't end with petty fines or overgrown fences. They end with peace, with growth, and with a quiet kind of justice that no HOA meeting minutes will ever record. Months after Karen disappeared and the HOA officially folded, I settled into a rhythm that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with rebuilding. My ranch thrived without interference. My trees, the ones she'd butchered, grew taller, stronger, more defined against the skyline. What had once been a battleground now felt like home again, a sanctuary free from suburban tyranny. Neighbors who once feared Karen's clipboard now brought over fresh-baked pies, swapped garden tools over the fence line, and shared beers under the wide-open sky. Without her oppressive shadow looming, people rediscovered how to be neighbors in the truest sense of the word. Lawns grew a little wilder. Children played a little louder. Life moved on better and brighter than before. But the irony, it kept unfolding in ways even I couldn't have predicted. You see, after my energy business took off, I began expanding beyond just my ranch. Small contracts turned into larger ones. My reputation as a guy who outwitted an HOA became something of a calling card in circles that mattered. I found myself consulting for nearby towns on how to transition off aging power grids, advising on sustainable infrastructure, helping homeowners associations, yes, HOAs, avoid the very pitfalls that had destroyed Karen's empire. Some people thought I was being ironic. I wasn't. I was being smart. Because while Karen had weaponized her HOA against me, I now had the expertise to make sure others couldn't do the same. I wasn't out for revenge anymore. I was out to make sure no one else had to fight this fight. Word spread. Articles were written. Podcasts called. The man who beat the HOA at their own game. I never asked for the title, but I'll admit it made me smile. Not because I needed the fame, but because it meant the lesson had been learned. The story was out there now, a cautionary tale dressed up as entertainment. And Karen? Well, life has a way of humbling the arrogant. Months after she vanished from our community, I heard through an old mutual acquaintance that she'd landed in a rental property somewhere upstate. No HOA, no authority, just another face in the neighborhood. Apparently, she'd tried to start another HOA there. Old habits die hard. But this time, the residents weren't having it. They shut her down before she could even order the letterhead. Some people learn the hard way. Others never learn at all. But the sweetest piece of irony came much later. One afternoon, during a meeting with a prospective client, I recognized the address immediately. A new suburban development, freshly built, struggling with infrastructure issues, power outages, poor planning, the kind of thing I now specialize in fixing. Guess who sat on their advisory committee? Karen, not as president, not even as a board member. Just an ordinary homeowner, volunteering out what she probably called civic duty. I almost declined the job out of principle. Almost. Instead, I accepted, with one condition written into the contract in small, neat print. No HOA shall exert authority over energy infrastructure decisions. Permanently, irrevocably, enforced by county oversight. They signed. Karen didn't even realize what she'd agreed to. It wasn't personal anymore. It was professional. But as I shook hands with the committee and walked Karen's neighborhood, inspecting outdated transformers and poorly laid lines, I couldn't help but notice how small she seemed now. No clipboard, no smug expression, just another face in the crowd. I gave her a polite nod. She didn't return it. Some victories don't need speeches or banners. Sometimes, winning is as simple as walking freely through the world you rebuilt, knowing the people who tried to tear it down now live within the boundaries you drew. And so, life went on. My ranch flourished. My business expanded. My neighbors became friends, not adversaries. And Karen faded into the footnotes of local gossip. The woman who lost everything trying to enforce rules she never had the right to wield. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. The best revenge is served green, in fields that grow back stronger, in businesses that rise from ruin, in peace found where conflict once reigned. Years later, when people drive past my ranch, they don't see the battle that once took place. They see tall trees lining the property, a shining office humming with clean energy, and a man sitting on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon with a quiet smile. They don't know the whole story, but they know enough. And somewhere out there, Karen knows too. She knows she lost. And I won. Quietly. Completely. Without ever raising my voice. Just my property values.